Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Gameweek 18 cheat sheet preview. This week is an extremely tough week. We already have a lot of postponements in hand, and we know what those specific games are. We don't know exactly whether the remaining games will go through, but we have to take the assumption that they do. I know a lot of us are going to be in positions where we have maybe 5 players playing, 7 players playing, and some people might be in more fortunate positions where they have at least 10 or 11 players playing, which is going to be a fantastic situation. Many people, of course, will be thinking about whether they take a 3 hit this week. And my suggestion is probably not, unless you are in a significantly bad situation, such as having 5 or 6 players ready to play and you are tempted to use the free hit. Because the reason why you'd like to ideally keep the free hit is with all these kind of blank game weeks that we have within the last 2 weeks, we know in the future we'll have much more double game weeks and triple game weeks to come. And those are fixtures where in those specific weeks, a lot of teams will play at least 2 matches, and having an ideal free hit team for those kind of game weeks will be ideal. Whether or not we actually get towards a position where, we can keep our free hit, we don't really know. My suggestion though is that hopefully with things returning to normal within a week or two's time, if you keep your team structure relatively similar, you will benefit later on by keeping your free hit, have much more stronger weeks in the future when you actually use your chips. Because from my experience, using free hits in blank game weeks is a little bit of a novice move. It has a very low ceiling because you're only playing one fixture and you are hoping for kind of extravagant results to come about through some of the fixtures in this week. And who knows, we could have very, very explosive weeks in the future where the ceiling is incredibly high, because some teams, as we know, such as Spurs, might have 3 games, in a week where for someone like Son, for example, if you find a way to put him in your team, or even Kane, God forbid he actually starts scoring, could be an interesting option, if they play 3 games back to back. And those are the kind of circumstances that I want you guys to think about before you even think about the cheat sheet this week. But let's actually go dive straight into the cheat sheet. If you guys want to just look at the cheat sheet as it is, not including postponements, here it is in its full glory. But I would actually like to keep it short and simple for you guys this week. We know there's a lot of postponements. I've removed every single player that is going to be involved in a postponed game. I might have actually missed 1 or 2 out. Apologies if I do. Please take into account of that. But I've made a cheat sheet this week that just focuses on players that are available. So we start with the defenders. You'll see it's an extremely short list. The reason why I've dropped Davies and Reguilon, as you can see here, is simply due to the fact that they're against Liverpool this week, and we, in a sense, have just moved away from 2 relatively nice Tottenham fixtures, and that's exactly why the defenders have been positioned poorly. Whereas with Arsenal, we know that they have good fixtures. Leeds is a team that looks quite dire right now. They're clearly missing Bamford, clearly missing Phillips, and the performance versus Man City was reminiscent of that. And Jack Harrison was the only player who really looked like he could create something versus Man City. And I'm not sure that's going to be enough even versus this Arsenal defense. That's why I think this week, if you're going for a free hit, or even if let's say you're trying to get at least 3 at the back, maybe it's time to look for an Arsenal defender. The argument that I'll probably make is if you don't have Ramsdale, of course, just get Ramsdale now. There's no necessary need to double up on the Arsenal defense, because some of the other teams who are playing this week, at least for now, as per our understanding, have good weeks, such as the Aston Villa defense, and another team such as City arguably have a good defense. So if you'd like to actually push up, let's say, to get a third City player, maybe it's the week you actually go for a City defender, if it's up to you. Ashley Young also falls. The reason why is because even though we did posit him as an interesting option last week, it was a little bit dismaying to see him actually be substituted just before he actually got his clean sheet points, and that's not a good sign as the fixtures come thick and fast with someone like Ashley Young at his age. Maybe Gerrard does think that he needs the rest. Maybe he doesn't think he'll play the full 90 minutes, and that's a big worry, right? When we've already seen one circumstance where he's been substituted off 60, there's no reason to really kind of play with your funds in that sense. You want to have a player who is at least going to be confirmed a clean sheet, or at least attacking return, and you're not going to get that guaranteed from Ashley Young. So for me, it just makes sense to move into players like Mings and Cash, or even Konza. The reason why is because I think even though Target and Cash are interesting picks for fullbacks, the way we have to see FPL, and specifically with Aston Villa, as we kind of mentioned with the FPL Teacher podcast, is a lot of their goals simply come through set pieces, and Mings is highly responsible for that. And in the games where, let's say, Aston Villa are given chances to deal with, it's kind of like with the Wolves defense, where the fullbacks don't actually create too many chances, but you'll see the centre backs are the ones getting bonus points because they are consistently in those scenarios where they are kind of blocking chances and things like that. And you don't really get penalized by Mings making his mistakes when he gives the enemy team a penalty. So that's kind of what I have to say about Mings. As far as Walker and Laporte and Stones, they all kind of have to rise. I know Walker was dealing with an injury, so you please keep that in mind, but Laporte and Stones are definitely interesting options. We actually saw Stones playing right back. He didn't really look very good there. Made a couple chances where he was caught in transition and made some mistakes as he was going forward. So that is a little bit of a worry. I think if Walker's available, he'll come back into the side, and the kind of defined centre-back pairing should be Laporte and Diaz, but there could still be rotation at this point in time. We know Man City probably will view this Newcastle match as another game once again to rotate players, and maybe we'll see someone like Diaz miss out. I'm not sure, that I have no kind of in the no news, but that's just my opinion on things like that. Diaz did get some rest in that game, so I imagine he will start again versus Newcastle. So clearly the priority option, if you're looking for, let's say, an additional Chelsea defender, a City defender, should be Diaz. And if you're looking for another Chelsea defender, maybe the most sensible option should be Alonso or Rudiger again, if you already have James, given the fact that most of the high-ranked players already have James in their team. But that's it for defense. It's very simple. I think the priority this week is, beyond the simple kind of trident of Cancelo, James, and Cancelo, you are probably looking for at least another City defender to put inside the team. But I think this week, when we're targeting Newcastle, you want to have maybe two City midfielders, arguably, where they could really explode against Newcastle. And then after that, we're probably looking at options such as the Aston Villa defense, which would be a very good differential due to the low ownership and the fact that they have looked very comfortable as a defense, alongside the fact that Burnley haven't looked very good with Cornet out. And I'm still not exactly sure whether Cornet can actually play this weekend, because if you actually cast your mind back to the Sean Dyche press conferences around Monday time, he wasn't very sure about Cornet's availability for the game, and of course we know that the Watford-Burnley fixture was postponed, so we'll see what happens there, and especially with Cornet, but I don't think he's going to play a huge impact where he might be the one causing Aston Villa to lose a clean sheet. But even still, those kind of Aston Villa options should, in my opinion, still be on your bench. The priority for me this week is probably getting an Arsenal defender if you don't already have one. If we go into the midfield, this is another situation where I think the Arsenal attack has been trending, and the reason why I say that is because Arsenal seem to be a team that clearly can contest versus these mid-table and bottom half teams very easily, and they struggle very evidently versus these top teams. And the fixture run for Arsenal is very good so long as they get to actually play the game. They have mostly a clean bill of health across the squad. One of the squads that are least kind of hit with COVID issues. I know they have around 3 or 4 positives, but the team that we saw being fielded out versus West Ham was more than enough, in my opinion, or is more than enough rather, going forward to actually do well versus some of the other teams, especially Leeds in the next week. So when I'm looking at that, I actually think that Arteta has a high chance of actually playing the same lineup, which is why, even though Smith Rowe is actually a top option here, I actually think Martinelli could be the biggest differential this week if you're looking to bring in a midfielder to try and attack the fixtures. I don't think it's a bad time to look at Martinelli either. Reason being because he's clearly playing this left wing role where he's allowed to make these diagonal runs forward. Fantastic run from him if you saw in the game versus West Ham. And he's had very consistent performances in the last 3 to 4 fixtures where he's gotten starts. We even saw a beautiful assist versus Manchester United as an example. And Martinelli is really stepping up in terms of form. We also know he's a bit more of a complete player in the box as well. We've seen him score headers in the past. This could be a great fixture for him if Arsenal are able to pepper Leeds with chances, which is exactly what we saw when Man City played them. Obviously, they're at complete levels apart between, Arsenal and City, but that's not really an issue when I think this Leeds team is looking so weak and giving up so many easy chances and so many runs where, due to their kind of one-to-one defending structure, we saw Man City effortlessly kind of pull away these Leeds defenders and allow for so many chances and runs in behind. We're going to get Bernardo Silva, Foden, were all players who got plenty of good chances to score in that match versus Leeds. And I imagine this will be much the same. So that's exactly why I think Martinelli will have a good fixture. Oh, actually, I need to take Maddison out of this list. Apologies, he will not be playing this week. But Rafinha is going to be an interesting option. Obviously, probably not just due to the context of the injuries and how I've mentioned how bad Leeds are playing. But if there is one talisman that can do something for your team, and he probably is still in your team due to all the kind of other injury issues that you'd have to deal with, Rafinha is clearly an option you'd like to keep. Saka is someone who, when I look at my team, is someone that would be quite interesting to bring on, because I actually think that he's been really improving in terms of form. The weird thing about Saka is he always creates consistent chances game to game, and he probably was the best Arsenal player on the pitch versus West Ham. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but just in terms of how often he creates a havoc against the enemy defense, I think Saka is a fantastic option. Whether he's actually truly explosive as an FPL asset is probably up for debate, but he's been someone who's kind of like a slow burner, someone who gets you consistent points. And in these kind of conditions, and especially with the Arsenal fixtures being good, I think Saka is also a great option this week. Ideally, if you could probably have one Arsenal midfielder, I think that would be the play this week. Maybe even Lacazette as a forward, just due to the forward options being so thin. But that's kind of where I have to leave it. Lucas Moura doesn't have a good fixture, so that's why I wouldn't really necessarily consider him at this point in time. And the one person who rises this week is going to be someone like Mount, who, even though he is heading into a Wolves game, which is going to be tough because we know Wolves have a fantastic defense, it's very clear that, especially since there are not many players right now available in our teams, that Mount is a consistent fixture of this Chelsea team, and he is very, very clearly the talisman. He's scored, I think, 3 or 4 games in a row now, and he's been key to this Chelsea offense, who still have actually created a lot of chances. If you look at the underlying figures behind the Everton game, you'll know that they created many ample opportunities for them to actually win and get the 3 points. But Everton had a very valiant performance in terms of defending the draw and actually securing those points, especially since they played a second string side. So that's going to be something that's going to affect Chelsea a lot. And not only that, but I think the injuries with Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Jorginho are going to have a lot of impact versus Wolves. Perhaps their ability to kind of control the game and starve out Wolves is going to be quite limited, because we know that Wolves have, for the most part, their first team available, with I think Ait-Nouri having the one injury in the squad and then Jimenez actually coming back. So that for me is good enough to say that maybe Mount is an option to avoid in the specific week if you're looking to bring in a defender. I think a midfielder, sorry, but I think the best player to bring in this week is going to be someone like Gundogan. A lot of you guys have already have someone like Foden or Bernardo Silva in your team. Maybe you'd like to bring in Foden if you actually already have Bernardo, but I think Gundogan is a fantastic player to bring in this week, just because it doesn't seem like a lot of us have the money to actually get Kevin De Bruyne. And unless you're going for a free hit where Kevin De Bruyne is your priority target, I think Gundogan looked fantastic in the game versus Leeds, and he wasn't actually playing that much, right? He was brought on in the second half, created ample opportunities, had 2 fantastic kind of on-the-shoulder runs versus defenders, and his diagonal runs will 100% play a part versus this Newcastle team, who leave a lot of space in behind as they go forwards. And I can't see how the City side doesn't really pull apart this Newcastle team that just had to play versus Liverpool and didn't look fantastic versus them. In theory, I think Liverpool were a little bit impacted by the fact that they have a rather thin squad compared to a City team. But the fact that players like Gundogan are arguably a little bit rested with the 45 minutes only being played, I think Gundogan can have a fantastic performance. Now, of course, there is another chance that Gundogan could get benched again, but I really think that his performance should put him as a shoe-in for the game versus Newcastle. And maybe someone like Bernardo Silva, if he came off, with a bit of a knock, could be rested for this game, and maybe someone like Sterling can come into the side. It's going to be really tough with the City team because you have so much rotation potentially in play. You might actually get it wrong, but that's why if you're playing a free hit, I think Gundogan is an interesting option, because you'll have players coming off the bench for you, even if he doesn't get the feature. So that's exactly how I'd see things. Gundogan also looks incredible from underlying stats, and I think he did really fit the eye test versus Leeds, and we know that Newcastle aren't a quality side, so him getting those chances once again versus Newcastle is a very, very tempting opportunity to have Gundogan in your team. And KDB is the one kind of City player who once again rises. The issue with Sterling and Mahrez is just simply rotation. Sterling is a little bit too costly, in my opinion, to be someone that you look at that has the chance of being rotated constantly. And Mahrez will probably have to deal with Jesus coming back this week, even though he had a great performance himself versus Leeds. KDB seems to be more of a permanent fixture as long as he's actually ready to play. And I imagine he will play again once again if Pep allows him to. So KDB once again looks like one of the most lethal options in the league, so long as he's fit. And that's obviously a big asterisk in the last 2 years, but he looked fantastic versus Leeds in within the 90 minutes of play, and he looked very fit. So I would be very happy to have KDB in my team if I could fit around some sort of team structure. If I go into the forwards now, it's going to be quite simple. I think you're not really looking at many options, because a lot of the teams from the forwards do come from these mid-table teams that have very, very tough matchups, such as City, such as Liverpool this week, and even Chelsea arguably. So for me, Watkins is the clear rise. I think if you're looking for a forward, which a lot of people are, I have a forward line of Antonio, Dennis, and King myself, and I clearly can't field a forward whatsoever. So Watkins seems to be the priority option so long as this Villa game goes ahead. and he has arguably good fixtures going forwards. The underlying stats aren't fantastic for Watkins, but if you watch the game, he was very deserving of the goal he scored, not necessarily the assist. But that's more than enough to say that I think Watkins is a good option this week, just because he has good fixtures. He is actually playing this week, and a lot of people watching Antonio will probably know that he just hasn't looked very good lately. So going into Watkins from Antonio is a nice option. Maybe even taking one out of Dennis and King is a good option if you have the money in the bank. Just so you actually can kind of like thin the squad where you have at least one player from each team that isn't, let's say, a City / Liverpool / Chelsea. So that's kind of the plan there. And sorry, Sanchez and McCarthy are not playing this week, so I can actually remove them. Aubameyang, keep in mind, is also not going to be playing this week. Kane and Lukaku just aren't tempting as options at their kind of price range. Clearly, Aubameyang is a 9+ player, and then Kane and Lukaku are 10+ players. But with Ramsdale, Son, Martinez, I think these are clear 3 keepers you'd probably like to have going forwards. Bar De Gea, who I've taken out for the list for the kind of purposes of illustrating who's available to play. So I think this week you'd probably want to have Ramsdale and Martinez if you're going for something like a free hit, with Ramsdale being the priority keeper, just because I think Ramsdale has more opportunities to create saves versus Leeds, who will still probably try to make shots on target, whereas Aston Villa are against a Burnley side who, in my opinion, don't create many chances when Cornet isn't playing at this moment in time. So that is going to be my kind of priority for the keepers right now. Sa is someone who, if you want to actually really bring in a keeper long term and you really don't want to go Ramsdale for some odd reason, then Sa maybe is a great option, because we know this Wolves team look like a fantastic defense. They still have a clean bill of health. Their defense is probably the best aspect of owning them in the league. I believe the kind of top leader of the game week in the previous week owned mostly Wolves defenders. So that is why I'm interested in Sa long term. I think the fixtures, even though they look kind of half bad, half good for Wolves, don't really matter, because we know they're capable of keeping clean sheets versus any team in the league. Them holding Liverpool to 94 minutes and also losing to City by a very kind of iffy penalty is a good enough, I think, justification and kind of evidential reason to illustrate that Sa is a good option. But yeah, as I said, this week Martinez is probably going to be a really good bench keeper if you're going for a free hit, if at all. But that's it for me this week, guys. The cheat sheet is very, very short, and the reason is just because of the postponements, and there's so many issues in our team that we have to alleviate. I would recommend not taking more than a -8 this week. I know it's really tempting to go for a -12 to try and maximize on this game week, but we must know that the ceiling isn't particularly high this game week. I think you try to focus on specific games where you think there will be explosive hauls if you want to take hits. So players like a Man City midfielder, or even going for someone like Watkins this week, just due to the fact that the fixtures are poor. And then also something like getting a keeper like Ramsdale if you don't have an available keeper this week. So that's pretty much my thoughts. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys very shortly, and hopefully with less postponements.